what happens is resonance, it changes our relationship to time. And this is a pretty profound concept, but it's like, but in these places you play a note and that note comes back, right? And it's suspended in the air. It feels like time expands and dilates. And all of a sudden you're just in this, instead of just a single moment, you're like the culmination of many moments are happening at once. But imagine if we tried to teach our children to speak by teaching them the alphabet first, like they had to learn to read and write before they started speaking. It doesn't make sense, right? That's not how we learn. We learn through experience, we learn through listening, we learn through mimicking, we learn through our own expression. That change is not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up, right? It has to start at the individual.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello everybody and welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Athayde, and today we're talking with Kim Riccelli. Kim is a versatile artist and visionary at the forefront of the emerging field of sound and embodied resonance. Son of the renowned Brazilian actress, writer, and producer Bruna Lombardi, and the Italian actor and director Carlos Riccelli, Kim draws inspiration from his family's rich heritage as he forges his own path in the arts. His journey has taken him through various realms of creativity, from founding the Resonance Group, a venture that explores the transformative potential of sound, to directing the Brazilian drama television series The Secret Life of Couples with HBO Latin America. Kim's work reflects a deep commitment to exploring the intersection of technology, sound, and human experience, making him a compelling voice in contemporary art and media. Hey Kim, how are you? It's such a pleasure to have you today with us. How are you doing?
Hi Maria, I'm great. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
That's a very interesting topic for me. It's new. And I thought it was a good idea to, have you on the beginning of the year that, people get more, let's say, even spiritual, right? Usually at the beginning of the years. So I thought it was something that it's more soul oriented. And, I have so many questions for you. So let's just dig into that. And, as usual, I like to begin with your journey. Like, we know about your career in film, television. You also have this very strong background in visual media, right? And then you made this transition to focus on sound and resonance. So what's behind that move? What sparked this change? If you want to go back to your journey to explain us that, it would be amazing.
Sure. Well, so, the part of visual media I sort of inherited, right? It came with the family. It's something I've been working on since I was my first jobs, right? Like as a teenager, I was already doing things on set and that kind of thing. And sound is something that came into my life later. I mean, I think it came for most people through music first, right? And I had always loved music since I was a young child. I was always very moved by music, and I loved to listen. I would put on my parents had records and a record player, right? And I would put on records and listen to the record player, and I just really enjoyed that. But I thought personally that I had no musical ability. Right. I thought that because of, maybe I think like some educational pitfalls, some things that, the way that music is presented, I think to children sometimes can be very discouraging depending on the child and the constitution of the child. And so my teachers had basically made me feel, or I felt based on their interactions, that I was like, okay, well, this isn't for me. I don't have music in me. I'm not someone who can express this way. And that I just internalized that as a very young child. And it wasn't until I was about 20 years old that someone gave me a little drum for my birthday, sort of like almost like a decorative drum, right? And I started to play it. And then I started to notice, this kind of comes naturally, right? There's something that's really innate in me that can do this, right? And of course, in the beginning, you're playing and people are like, "Oh, stop," but at that point, I had enough, confidence, and I had enough interest in it that I just kept going, and I kept refining, and I studied with different teachers, and with time, it became something. It went from just being, a thing to being a hobby, and then finally something where I was really passionate about it, right? And as I became passionate, like I started to pursue it more, and I started to really want to understand it more. And I had the great fortune of, I was living in California at the time, and I had the great fortune of having some amazing teachers from many different backgrounds. So I studied with, everything from Middle Eastern and Persian to Indian to, classical, like Western music. And I got a lot of different input, and not so much about the technical aspects of music, but more like the philosophical, right? Like how music expresses the ideas and the sentiment of a culture, right? And how we as a culture use music to express and to also kind of create a cultural identity, right? It's like, I think music is such a big part of that. And then, as I kind of kept going in that direction, I came across an instrument called the handpan, or at the time it was the hung. It was just, which looks like a little flying saucer. It looks kind of like a little UFO. And it was an instrument that had been recently created in the world. It was created around 2000, 2001. And that was in 2003 when I first saw it. And instantly I fell in love with it. I resonated deeply with it. The sound that it made, and just
is this something that you use, like this stick that you move around it, or
no? Those are Tibetan bowls. I wish I didn't think about it. I didn't bring one here, but we can maybe, I'll send you some photos or video, and you can insert later.
We can add. Yeah.
So but it looks like a little, like a lot of people say, it looks like a spaceship or a shield, or, people say a turtle. I've heard all kinds of things. A walk is is a popular one. And that instrument, just by its very design, makes playing very accessible. It makes, it's very intuitive, the way that you can approach it. And with a short time, you can really be expressing musically in a very profound way, right? And so that really interested me, because that was something, it was one of the things that helped me get over this barrier, this idea that I had internalized of like, oh, I'm not musical, I have no musical ability, right?
Wait, just let's stop here for a second. And because this resonated so strongly with me, because it's amazing how many people simply don't pursue the gifts that they have because of those few people around them involved in their education life, and just because of maybe just old way of teaching, or I don't know, or traditions, whatever happens, that you just kill something within you, and you are lucky enough to have other possibilities of just learning from yourself and understanding that yes, you could pursue that. But and it actually resonates with me specifically, because also when I was at a very young age, I also loved, I wanted to learn I don't know, piano or whatever, and the teachers kept this idea that you have to learn how to read, to play, and connect reading with playing, instead of just playing from your heart and just And I just found out later in life, when I was early 20s, that I actually had an issue with my vision, and I would never be able to read it. Those little partitures. I would never be able to read, and I just wanted, since I was very young, I just wanted to learn by listening and playing, and I could play very well just by listening. But I still wanted a teacher, and I could never find this teacher because they always wanted me. And this is something that happens to you that just kind of kills this side of you that could have, developed and just, for the pleasure of it. But it also, I know that it develops the brain a lot, right? How
Absolutely.
many people just don't develop that because we're just getting it wrong when educating? Each person has a way of learning. So I'm glad you are able to pursue that. But it always get back to education. Is like here on the podcast. But it's amazing how, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's amazing. It's interesting that we have that parallel journey. And I so many people have that, and a lot of the work that I do today is around the voice, and the voice as our primary really mode of expression, right? It's the first thing that translates our thoughts, right, which is energy that's inside us, into something that's actually tangible in the world, sound, right? It's energy that's outside us. So it's really, to me, that's the bridge. The voice is the bridge. And people have so much like baggage around their voice, right? Because of things they've been told, because of ways they've been repressed, because of, comparison to other people and all of these things. And I mean, of course, I'm talking about it in the realm of sound because this is what I'm really passionate about. But this is true across so many realms, right? With education, all of the arts really that comes so naturally to human beings, right? It's such a natural part of our expression. When we try to fit it all into one way of like learning and one way of teaching, it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. For some people, it works very well, but for others, and even for the people who it works really well. Like, for example, I have some people who I work with who are classically trained musicians, right? Who at a very young age were playing like violin concertos or something like that, right? And so they have a lot of technical ability. They know how to read music. They understand harmony, but they don't feel free to improvise. They have a really hard time with improvisation, right? And so that's another aspect of it. Like, you can have all of this ability, but like it may not be connected to that part of you that just expresses, that just
go with it. Exactly.
Flow, right?
No, especially because it's a very tough education. It's a very tough way of educating, right? You can't miss. You have to follow the techniques. You have to read it that way. So it's nothing that you're really playing from spirit, right? You're just really following the rules somehow.
Yeah, I mean, and it can produce amazing results. I mean, there's no arguing that someone who has the classical musical education has a skill set that is really profound, right? That's really incredible, and it allows them to do beautiful things. It's just about connecting it all the way across to every part of our being, right? And you said something, and I think it's important to clarify. You said, I think that this kills it in people. And luckily, I don't think that's true. I don't think it ever actually kills it in anyone. I think it can put it to sleep. I think it can kind of temporarily suppress something, but I don't think that is something that can be killed. I think it's something that is...
I fully agree.
Yeah, it's a part of who we are, and it's actually... at any moment, at any opportunity, we have the ability to reconnect to it and to learn to express from that place. And once we start doing that, we actually see that it's the most natural thing in the world.
Yes. Perfectly put. So, and then let's go back to your journey, right? So you mentioned that you went to California, right? And then you had access to all those amazing people and all this diversity and cultural differences. And then, and that's what made you click about, founding a resonance group. Something happened in between.
A lot of things happen in between. So yeah, we're talking, it's a long journey. I'm 42 now, and this was probably in my 20s, right? So, one of the main things that happened is I started having, I always loved to travel. Right. It was always a big passion of mine. And so at some junctures of my life, like after I'd, made some money and been like, I was like, okay, I'm going to just do what in Brazil we call mochilão, right? Which is like, just travel with a backpack and let's just go. And the difference was, instead of just the regular backpack, I had the instrument on my back, right? And I had another little bag with my clothes, but like this instrument is very portable. That's one of the beautiful things about it. The handpan or the hung is very portable. And so I took this instrument and I started to go all kinds of places all over Europe. I went to Morocco, I went to Japan, I went to China, I went to many, many different places around the world. And in those travels, I started to, like, I would just, just because I wanted to, I would sit, like, let's say I'll go in a square and start to play, right? Or I would listen, I'd be walking and I would hear like, musicians, like local musicians playing in like a little, a place. And I would go in and listen to them at first and then say, hey, I have an instrument here. And they're always very receptive. And the amazing part was, even when I didn't speak the language, it was just an instant connection, right? It was a language that transcended our intellect, right? And it just allowed us to connect on a very, very deep place, like heart to heart place, right? And so I made really incredible friendships that way. And it opened up so many doors, right? Because once you connect to a local person that way, you're immediately more than just a tourist, right? So that part of them that just sees you as a tourist disappears, and then they start to connect with you as a human being. And then they're like, oh, come to my house, like come have dinner. Oh, let's go for a boat ride. Oh, I want to take you to this amazing place, and so it really like unlocked a lot of things for me in that way. And in those, as part of those experiences, I started to, either I was brought to, or I ended up somehow in resonant spaces, right? So places that have a strong reverberation, like old churches, or, like abandoned radar dome, or in a Turkish bath, like an underground Turkish bath, or, caves, all kinds of things like this, right? And as I started to play in these places, something really profound started to unlock for me, started to happen. Because to me, what happens is resonance, it changes our relationship to time. And this is a pretty profound concept, but it's like, when we play, normally we play and we listen, and the sound, it happens and then it's gone, right? And then the next sound comes in, and right. But in these places, you play a note and that note comes back, right? And it's suspended in the air. It feels like time expands and dilates, and all of a sudden you're just in this, instead of just a single moment, you're like the culmination of many moments are happening at once. And it was like an aha moment for me, right? And I started to realize, not just by playing, but and especially with my voice, that so you're inside of a cave, let's say, and you start to sing, right? You hear that energy that you project out is now coming back to you. So our bodies are naturally self-harmonizing systems, right? We're always harmonizing to our environment. If it's cold, our bodies get warmer. If it's warm, our bodies sweat, and right, like they're constantly looking for that balance, that equilibrium. Well, that same mechanism can be engaged by interacting sonically, right, with this space. And so as I started to sing in these spaces, and really also listen, right? That's the other key. It's not just express, but even first it comes like the listening. As I started to listen deeply and then express in these places, I started to feel how my body began to make little micro adjustments. So something would relax in my throat or my diaphragm, or, my body automatically made these adjustments in order to create more harmony. Right? Because we're always moving towards more harmony. We're moving away from disharmony and more towards more harmony. It's just a natural impulse, right? And so as I began to do this in a short time, it became, to me, it's like one of the most profound sort of spiritual practices, or, a practice of really knowing yourself and getting in touch with your expression and getting in touch with your authenticity and getting in touch with this, this very, like I said, very natural part of your being that isn't necessarily given a lot of space in modern society, especially.
That's true. And that's so, now that you're mentioning that, and I remember that you mentioned to me when, we got to know each other, how sound can make this positive influence on our personal communal experience. So that's where you're getting, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that, on a personal level, I think that sound is, I'll put it in a different way. So years after I was already, doing this, I became exposed to the work of an incredible, philosopher and anthropologist called Harmit Rose, right? And he has a book about resonance, and he speaks about resonance from the social point of view, right? And when I got exposed to this material, it was just like, yes, because like I had been experiencing that on a personal level, but it can also apply on this very macro collective level, right? And he brings about it exactly in how our relationship to time changes if we're in resonance or if we're in the state that he calls alienation, right? So alienation is it's the state of feeling cut off from everything, right? It's like we're not feeling like we're resonating with something else. It's like we just feel like we're on our own little bubble. And modern society that is in this pace of like constant acceleration, right? Like we have to keep accelerating, and we're not even moving forward necessarily as much as we have to accelerate to not slide back, right? And so he uses the metaphor of like a downward escalator, right? Like you're climbing escalators and it's getting faster and faster, and you have to just keep climbing faster and faster just to stay still, right? And so on the personal level, how that I feel like sound is one of the most amazing tools that we have in order to explore this state, in order to explore this, it's more than a metaphor because it's not conceptual, it's somatic, right? It's not just intellectual. The intellectual understanding is a part of it, and it it helps to create space for that state to happen. But ultimately, it's actually about you having an experience, right? We don't learn so much from just mental. We learn when we have an experiential understanding of that thing, of whatever it is, right? And so,
yes. No, please finish.
No, I was just going to connect it to what you said earlier, of like, it's like sitting at the piano and someone saying, oh, like just read these notes and play, versus like allow something to flow through you, and then with time, like, okay, yeah, now you can connect, you can understand that this is a language and you can learn the alphabet. But imagine if we tried to teach our children to speak by teaching them the alphabet first, like they had to learn to read and write before they started speaking. It doesn't make sense, right? That's not how we learn. We learn through experience, we learn through listening, we learn through mimicking, we learn through our own expression, right? Sorry, go ahead. What were you?
No, that was perfectly put. And I want to. We're still in this moment of definitions, right? And you're explaining to everybody that is listening to us the basics, and then I want to get to the practical side, but still, on the explanation part. I remember that you mentioned to me, you said this phrase, if I'm not wrong, that the universe is governed by the law of resonance. So I really wanted to go, deeper into that before we get to the practical side of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Well, we could do a whole, podcast just on that, right? Because it's very profound. And I think, this is a concept that's existed in many different forms throughout humanity's history in so many different cultures in so many different ways. But essentially, the way that I understand it, right, the way that I've come to understand it and explain it is, anytime that you have patterns that repeat at different scales, you have resonance, right? You have so when you think about the universe, right, we have this super macro scale that is really kind of inconceivable to us, right? In our current state, it's like when you think about the size of the universe and the size of these, star clusters and galaxies and things, it's not something that we can really conceptualize, right? We can get an idea of it, but it's not something we can conceptualize. But we see in that most macro scale, we see patterns that are self-similar to patterns that we see in the most micro scales here in our daily experience, in a way that we actually can relate to, that makes our relationship to it a lot more meaningful, right? And so whenever you have resonance, you have a transfer of energy, you have a transfer of information. And information, like I said, not just conceptual information, but experiential information is what offers us meaning. It's how we make meaning of the world, right? And so the universe is governed by these laws of as above, so below, right? That's a part of Hermetic philosophy, right? This idea of, it's an idea of resonance. It's idea that in the macro and the micro, there are patterns that are observable that you can relate to, and it helps you relate to the macro by looking in the micro, and vice versa, right? And then also when you go even deeper in the micro, now as we study like the microscopic world, we see the same thing, right? We see certain patterns and ratios, mathematical and really harmonic ratios, right? Ultimately, this is really about harmonics. And so, so many people have done, studied. I mean, Pythagoras is one, more recently, if you can call it that, but more recently in Western thought, in Western philosophy, who really studied deeply the science of harmonics and the science of harmony. But this is something that is, like I said, it's kind of been with us since the very dawn of humanity, because it's intuitive knowledge, right? So we keep on finding, for example, older and older flutes, right? I think the oldest flute that we found now made of bone is over 14,000 years old, right? It's dated to be over 14,000 years old. And when you sound that flute, when you play that flute, you see that the scale that the flute was tuned in is very similar to a modern scale today, right? So a human being, or even an ancestor of the human being as we consider a human today, created an object and tuned it, and it's the same as we would tune it today. Isn't that incredible? And they had no knowledge of anything, right? Like a formal knowledge. They just were listening and they were playing what felt right. Right. And so that's resonance. Like, look at that. That's a pattern that's repeating now, not just across space, but across time. Right. Like over millennia, that pattern is still meaningful to us. Right. So to me, that's magical. Right. That's just magical. Like I think that's I really am deeply emotionally affected by that kind of knowledge and that kind of experience. It really makes me feel connected in a way, connected beyond something just in my mind. It makes me feel a connection to all of our ancestry and all of our, all of the collective human experience on Earth.
Yes, all of history, and then you're talking about from moving from this very, very personal experience that you have, and then your understanding on the collective experience. So is that what inspired you to create this sound sanctuary? You have the sound sanctuary, you have the sound summit. Are those the collective experiences that you envision? And, tell us all about it. How does it work? What type of experience do people go through?
Sure. So, well, okay. So, in this journey along that I've been sharing, at one point I met a someone who became my partner in resonance. His name is Alan Tower, and he is an amazing musician and just an amazing sound explorer, amazing human being. And he's the first person who I really connected to. And when I shared these ideas, it was like, ding, it was like it bounced back, right? There was resonance immediately, right? Because a lot of people where I shared this, they hadn't necessarily had the kind of experiences. And so maybe it landed intellectually, but it didn't land, in the heart, right? And he had as a musician, as a sound explorer, he had these kind of experiences. And so we had kind of embarked on this path together. And I brought to him this idea of creating a space called is called the Sound Sanctuary. It's had many names throughout the years, but it's essentially a purpose-built space, a sonic chamber for creating the possibility for these kind of experiences, right? And using really the latest technology. So because we already have caves, we already have churches, we already have, places that have incredible like acoustics, but none of them were actually built for sound. They were built with some other kind of purpose, and because of their harmonic proportions, right? Because usually what is visually harmonic will tend to translate to being sonically harmonic as well, because it's all about ratios, right? But they weren't built for sound, right? And I was like, wow, well, we're kind of like a visually focused culture, but where are our special sonic structures, right? Where are our places that are built? Where are our sonic temples, right? Where are these places that are built for sound and for sound experience? And so I started to look, right? I started to research as much as I could and look in the world and see, are there places like that? And I found certain things, but nothing like what I was really feeling was possible, right? And so together we've been embarked on this journey, and in time, more people joined. So we had an incredible architect join us, Shay Trahan, and he was doing his master thesis on sound and sonic spaces, and he had some amazing experiences visiting different places. He has a great TED Talk for those who want to see. I forget the name of it, but it's Shay Trahan. If you look, it's wonderful. So, the three of us moved in this direction for a while, and then more and more people started coming in as we shared and as we created, our presence online and things like that. And in time, this became what is today known as the Resonance Group, right? So the Resonance Group is this, it is the culmination of many, many years of work and so many people's interests and passions around sound and around, the possibility that we have of leveraging sound even further, right? We already make amazing uses of sound with music and in technology and things, but there are certain aspects of it that I feel, and I think we collectively feel, are unexplored, right? And so that's what we came together to do, and that's what we're doing. And so the Sound Sanctuary is one of our projects. The Sound Summit is another project. And so the Sound Summit began as just, the Resonance Group is people all over the world. We have people in the United States, Canada, all over Europe, India, Brazil. And we usually meet online. Like we have meetings where we get on Zoom and we share and etc. But we wanted to make that happen in person. And so we started to do the Sound Summit began as something just as an internal thing, right? And in time it expanded. And so this year, for example, we're going to be meeting in Northern California in this very beautiful space. And so when we come together, it's always with the intention of sharing, our latest developments, and also, visioning together and seeing where we want to go with it and what wants to be created. And then also creating experiences for each other, right? So because each of us has our own unique approach to creating, to working with sound, and to creating, we have instrument builders and instrument makers, we have inventors, we have actually an amazing NYU professor named Megan Poe, whose birthday is today. So happy birthday,
Happy
Poe.
birthday.
And she's just an amazing human being. She designed designed and offers a course on love at NYU. And so she has that, she's just deeply passionate about sound as well. We have Ivy Ross, who is a Google design executive, who's part of the group. So there's really a lot of interesting people, and it serves really as an incubator, right? So we take a lot of the ideas and people apply them in whatever fields and whatever places that they're working on. So that's the Resonance Group. You can go to resonancegroup.us and you can see a little bit more about some of the projects and some of the things we're doing.
That's super interesting. And just a note to our listeners. So today we're recording this episode. Today is January the 24th, because it's just going to be live in February. I mean, in a couple of days, of weeks. But so just so people know the correct date of the birthday of her friend. That's January 24th. Okay. So really interesting, Kim. So a couple of questions for you, and now getting a little more macro, and now just trying to work a little with the topic of the future and what we're expecting, like as we usually do here in the podcast. I think you mentioned something very interesting, and you already gave us this example of the flute. And how can we learn and connect ancestral wisdom traditions to your work, and how do you see them playing a role in shaping our future? And adding to that, yesterday I was, always when I'm on the traffic jam, I listen to so many podcasts. And I have this thing, so I think 90% of my podcasts on my library, they are related to science, right? And there was this discussion specifically about how we should be learning to use traditional wisdom into science. So when I was reading our questions again, I was just listening to that recently. Because how science usually is focusing on the technologies and the future, but sometimes just letting go traditional wisdoms that could be more applied to that, to even, enrich. And now that's the question again, but, to your field. So how do you see that, and how do you see that as a tool and in shaping the future?
Yeah, wow. Well, okay, I want to start by saying that I feel like it would really benefit us as a species, and as particularly people, like in the West, to expand our definition of science, right? Because we take kind of science as this idea of like, oh, whatever follows the scientific method that was established, such and such period, and everything after that is science, and everything before that isn't really science. And I get that. And I think, the scientific method is incredible, right? It's an amazing thing. But if we get too fixated, it's a tool, right? And if we get too fixated on the tool, we lose sight of the whole, right? And so the map is not the territory, right? No matter how good the map is not the territory. The territory is experiential, it's somatic, it's about interacting with the natural world, right? And so from that perspective, the indigenous cultures of this planet, all over the planet, have more experience and tradition observing and interacting with the natural world than anyone else, right? So it's kind of insane to discount that, all of that experience, all of that work, all of that observation, all of that wisdom, that's been passed down through generation after generation after generation and refined, right? And so, for example, here in Brazil, right, like science is just beginning to catalog and find benefits, like for medicinal benefits, for example, for a lot of the species in the Amazon, right? Like, but if you look at what's classified versus what's not classified, it's still, I mean, we got a long way to go, right? But if you go and you talk to some of the indigenous people of the Amazon, they know all of the plants and they know all of their uses. I mean, at least in their area, right? It's like, and by collectively talking to many different tribes people and, in different areas, you start to get this panorama of deep knowledge, right? Deep wisdom, and not just about like and it's not reductionistic, right? It doesn't just reduce the plant to like, oh, this is the active compound and this is the, this is the effect. It's like, it looks at, okay, how does this plant fit into this whole system? What are the cycles of this plant in relationship to the cycles of the system? What's the, and what is this plant actually teaching us in the way that it exists in harmony with the biome, right? As an essential part of the biome. So to me, we really need to start looking at the world in that way, right? Like, and some of us already are. Like when I say we, I don't want to be exclusionary, because these people never stopped, right? These cultures, they see the world as living, breathing thing, right?
I need to make a recommendation here to the listeners that are interested in this topic, and that was exactly what you're talking about, Kim, is exactly the whole season of This Is One of My Favorite Podcasts. So for everybody that is listening, I need to apologize because it's going to be in Portuguese. So it's a Brazilian podcast. And the name is Ciência Suja. I don't know if you heard of them, Ken. Ciência Suja. And they're amazing.
Dirty science.
Yes, you should. They're backed by Serra Pilheira. And it means, for people that don't speak Portuguese here, it means a dirty science and this whole discussion around science. But it's really, the content is really rich. And their last season is exactly around that. So that's super, super interesting. And so you want to connect that to your field, right? So do you see that being also used when it comes to the music and the resonance and sound? And also adding to that as well, I'd love us to get into the role of all this technology evolution as well. And how do you see that unfolding, right? Everything that has been going on, that's surely having a lot of impact on music and sound as well. How do you see this evolution as well?
Yeah. Okay. So, again, whenever we talk about like shaping our future, right? It's important that we realize that some of the decisions that we make now, right? All of the decisions really, but it's particularly some very key decisions are going to have very, very different outcomes for the future of humanity as a species, right? And so our technology in general, not when it began, right? But now, after a certain point, it started to become. So with technology, what is technology, right? Let's start with that. Like anything that is a tool that allows us to enhance our natural abilities in some way can be considered technology. And so I see, for example, traditional practices of yoga and qigong and meditation are technologies, right? They're tools that we learn to work with our systems and work with our bodies in order to generate a particular result, a repeatable result, right? But then, you look at like basic technologies that humans have developed over time, and they were always ways of enhancing what we could already do with our bodies, right? What we could already do physically. And as we kind of have come into this digital age, and in particular, because of this, hyper-capitalistic society model that we're existing in, where everything needs to be, it needs to be constantly expanding. There needs to be infinite growth, which is impossible on a finite planet, right? But and we that technology began to be, in a way, weaponized, right? In a way, it's our technology is now, instead of enhancing our abilities, so much of it is, it's become almost parasitic, right? It's taking advantage of some innate systems like our dopamine system, right? Our dopamine, like our reward system, and to harness and to channel our most precious resource, which is our attention, right? Because where we put our attention is where our energy flows. And so when our attention is constantly being pulled in so many different directions by these, these tools, and they're wonderful tools. Don't get me wrong. I am definitely not like a Luddite. I'm definitely not against technological development. Here we're using an incredible tool right now to have this conversation, a bunch of them, right? But I feel like along the way, some of the humanity has been lost in favor of an extractivist kind of mentality, right? And this is, you see this reflected all across our planet, right? We're extracting resources without connecting to the earth in the same way. Again, this is where we go back to the indigenous cultures, right? We've always used resources, we've always extracted, but there was a deep reverence and a deep gratitude and a deep connection that was always present. And so in that reverence and that connection allowed us to be in a relationship that was healthy and sustainable, right? We didn't take more than we needed, and we didn't take more than we put back in some way. There was always an offer and an exchange, right? And that's not just a like, oh, what a nice idea. Like, that's survival. That's long-term sustainability and survival and resilience of a species. It depends on that. And in any relationship, whether you're talking about a relationship to the planet, or whether you're talking about, interpersonal relationships, or whether you're talking about global, geopolitical relationships. If those things aren't present, we have discord and chaos and misunderstanding and distortion and war and etc. And we find ourselves in the situation where we are now as a species, right? And so to me, the work with resonance and the work with sound is one very powerful tool to restore that awareness, first of all, within ourselves, right? So that we have a very innate experiential understanding of our connection to the whole, of our connection to these deeper part of ourselves that, like I said, aren't given a lot of space in modern society, right? But then expanding that, they're incredible practices. And these are some of the practices I offer most often, which are group dynamics, right? Where people are expressing and listening, or again, listening and expressing, because listening always comes first, together, right? And so from that space, a type of relationship is established that it's beyond what our normal social relationships normally offer, right? It's so deep, it's so natural, and it moves people to tears every time. I have never offered this in any group, independent of their background or of the circumstance, whether we're talking about like a corporate experience or we're talking about, in a yoga studio or whatever, everything in between. Every time people are moved to tears by the experience, and not insignificant number of people are moved to tears by the experience. And so why, right? Because it touches, it dissolves this boundary, this illusory boundary, that we have with the other, and it allows us to have a very direct experience of our connection, of the fact that all life is interconnected. It's one thing to understand it, it's another thing to feel it and to experience it, right? And sound is that bridge, And so, and taking that, and if we expand that even further, if we have more and more people who are experiencing life that way, then they are making all of their choices from that space. And then so our social systems begin to reflect that, right? And our government structures begin to reflect that. And it has to come. Like, I really believe that change is not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up, right? It has to start at the individual. It has to. If we aren't all collectively creating a different experience of being, then no amount of regulation, no amount of, we see where that heads, right? It just creates more conflict. It just creates like, well, I think this and I think that, and polarization. And, we're in some ways we're more connected than we've ever been. And in some ways we're more divided than we've ever been, right? As a species.
Yes. And that's this dichotomy. And that's why we discuss so much the responsible and ethical use of technology and all the implications around that, because it can make us closer. It can connect everybody. It can be inclusive. It can be, if you think about not only space, but even people that disabilities and things like that. And on the very same time, it can be the complete opposite and generate anger and generate disconnection and generate more closeness, right? And bubbles. So when you look ahead, given everything that's going on today, do you feel yourself more pessimistic about the future? Are you an optimistic? Like what, when looking everything that's going on today? And I know that you like your work is like your essence talking to you is what you want to do and what you want to create for sure is something really good and optimistic. But still, how do you feel when looking outside for our future?
To be completely honest with you, Maria, there's days and days. There are days where I feel we're constantly exposed in the media and to these horrors that are happening, right? And it's challenging. It's challenging to receive that day after day and to not feel crushed by it, right? To not feel in some way or another just distanced from our essence and distanced from any kind of sense of optimism, right? And so, of course, I have those days. And at the same time, I've had enough experiences, not just with sound, but just life experiences in general in different communities and spoken with enough people that my understanding is actually that the overwhelming majority of people on this planet want harmony. The overwhelming majority of people on this planet want peace. The overwhelming majority of people on this planet actually are most passionate and concerned about just having their families and their friends and their loved ones and their expanded circle and their society be beautiful and thriving and happy and healthy. And I feel like that's the most natural thing for the most number of people that I've encountered. And so that makes me optimistic, because I feel like the problems that we're facing, as dire as they are not problems that are where the root cause is our essence, right? It's like I think there's many schools of thought that say like, oh, humans are inherently cruel and humans, that like everything we're seeing is a result of that. And it's like, I don't believe that. I honestly don't believe that. I think that any kind of cruelty or evil action, if you want to put it that way, they're trauma responses. They're a response to they're a distortion that has been generated as a trauma response, right? As something where someone has experienced some kind of suffering, maybe generationally, and that suffering, they haven't had the tools to integrate that. They haven't had the tools to move past that. And so that suffering is now informing their action and their choices. And hurt people, right? Like people who are hurt create and create more suffering, create that kind of cycle. But I know I'm very optimistic, partially because of our amazing communication technologies and how many people a single person can reach nowadays, right? I'm very optimistic that, and I see more and more people offering tools, offering guidance, offering help, sharing their journeys of healing, sharing their journeys of recovery, sharing their journeys of transformation, integration, right? But I feel like it's one of the most important things that we can do, especially as people who are speaking in the media, like what you're doing, is to offer perspective. Because if people have the perspective of, okay, wow, something else is possible, that's the first step in getting them to move towards this integration. Because, dealing with trauma is uncomfortable by its very nature. Trauma is uncomfortable, right? It gets locked up and it gets fragmented and it gets put away in us because it's hard to be with. It's hard to just feel those things, right? It's something that, and so we kind of put it away and we repress it and it stays there in some way. So in order to have the motivation to sit with that discomfort, to move through, to digest that discomfort, we need some kind of motivating factor, some kind of greater perspective, right? And so to me, that's like conversations like these are my attempt at offering that perspective. They're my attempt at putting some more perspective in the world so that people can see like, okay, wow, like that's possible. Like what, how can I integrate that perspective into my daily life, right? How can I allow my gifts to become a part of that perspective so that they're gifts for the world?
That's, the perfect way of ending this episode, Kim. It was so amazing to have you with us today. If you have any, final message, you already gave a very, very strong one. But, if you have any final message to the listeners, or if you have any exciting new project that it's, up for this year that you'd like to share, the final words is yours. And, thank you so much again. And thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you, Maria, for offering this opportunity and for just the work that you're doing. And yeah, I mean, I guess, the message is really, it's the message. It's not my message, right? It's a message that you will hear over and over and over again from so many different traditions all over the world. And it's what you're seeking is already inside you. What you're looking for, all of the harmony, all of the love, all of the happiness, everything that we're naturally drawn forth, to move towards, it already exists inside of us. It actually is what we're comprised of, right? It's the very essence of our beings. And so it's actually the process is about, again, releasing and integrating anything that gets in the way of that natural state. But when we realize it's natural, that it's ours, it's like, I feel like a lot of the time when I speak to people, the disconnect starts at a place where I've had it myself, where I shared at the beginning of this episode. Oh, well, that's not for me. I'm not that. Oh, I'm not musical. I'm not this. Like, it's just a belief. And if that belief was put there, it can be removed. It can be changed. It can be updated, right? But like you 2.0, right? Your belief 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, keep going. keep going. Like, don't stay fixed in anything. You know, the only constant is change, and we have the ability, no matter where we are in our lives, at whatever point in our lives, we have the ability to change and to take in new information, right? Like, science has shown this. Neuroplasticity is a thing. It's real. And so look for the experiences and for the tools that resonate with you, that allow you to do that, because it's possible. And the tools are going to be different. For me, it's sound. For someone else, it could be something totally different. But whatever it is for you, I guarantee you, there's already someone out there who's offering it, who's already gone through the journey and is offering it, and will be delighted to share with you, as I am delighted to share everything that I've learned and everything that I've experienced. Because that way we just keep on growing this beautiful, you know, abundant giving circle. And I truly believe that we have the capacity to change humanity that way.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.